Hello everybody, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are located. I'm Jan Sillerman, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. And hopefully not a surprise to anybody, the topic of today is working with JavaScript in the ForNAV Designer. And well, if you are one of us who have been around for a long time, JavaScript is somewhat a new thing compared to what we know from NAV. But something that also has a lot of great opportunities. So before starting out, I just want to emphasize that this webinar will be recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel afterwards. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Mark, who is today's speaker. Mark,
thank you, Jan. Thank you. Yep. So welcome everybody to this webinar about JavaScript. Very enthusiastic about this one. JavaScript, as Jan mentioned, is something new for a lot of NAV developers, although it has been with us for a while as a extension from the user interface of the web client and the Windows client. So some of you may have already played around with it a little bit. I know I did. I played around a little bit with the Microsoft examples that they shipped to show a Bing map as a client add-in. But for most of us, JavaScript will be new. So we actually thought we had a lot of feedback. So we're going to do a JavaScript 101, where we're actually going to compare JavaScript to AL. I'm going to show you a couple of the pitfalls. Everything that you see today in this webinar is not mandatory to use. You can use ForNAV completely without JavaScript. JavaScript is an option that we put in, and the reason why we put in the JavaScript option is because we think that it's convenient and useful to have everything in one place, especially if you're an end user trying to work with the product. I think we think it's a good idea that you have everything in one place and you don't switch all the time in between NAV and ForNAV. Although, as you will see, I will show you some examples that if the business logic really gets complicated, it should be an NAV and not in ForNAV. So let's look at the agenda for today. We'll start with some fundamentals of JavaScript, and we'll explain syntax and operators and compare them to NAV, to AL, and see where the differences are. And then I have an example report. And in the example report, I have a whole bunch of examples what you can do with JavaScript. Some of the examples is a little bit creative. Maybe you wouldn't do that in real life, but I just wanted to give you the idea of how powerful JavaScript is and that you don't need to start writing AEL code for basic things like moving something to an uppercase or things like that, or concatenating strings. And then we'll go through some common mistakes that I made myself. I actually found a list of these mistakes on the website. I will give you the URL of the website in the last slide. I think the mistakes is also a good way of explaining the differences between JavaScript and AL, which is more of a Pascal-like language. So CL is not JavaScript, which is emphasized by the little bang, the unequal sign. JavaScript actually has a logo. I could not find a logo for CEL, so I actually decided to pick the Navision Financials logo and made that logo for our programming language. So maybe this is an idea to create a competition to see if we can actually make a logo for CEL. So we have that just the same as JavaScript. So let's start with the show and enjoy. Okay, so that was fun, right? The reason I actually showed this is that if you talk to NAV developers about JavaScript, you listen to their feedback, it's like it's a programming language from a different galaxy. But I think it's actually the other way around. For a lot of people, AL is a programming language from a different galaxy, and to emphasize that, on GitHub, JavaScript is the most used programming language for sharing source code. And on Stack Overflow, JavaScript is the most frequently discussed and asked language, which again, I agree, would also emphasize the thing. If there's a lot of questions about JavaScript, then maybe it's a little bit difficult. But anyway, it's a very popular programming language, but it is different compared to CAL, right? So a couple of fundamentals. First of all, JavaScript is case sensitive. It's not as friendly as AL, where you can type a begin in lowercase and then save your object, and then the compiler will make the begin statement uppercase, or you do a find first in lowercase, and the compiler will actually correct you automatically. For those of you who have already worked with the VS Code preview, where Microsoft is moving us from C-side to Visual Studio Code, you will actually see that in VS Code you can write begin and end both in uppercase, lowercase, title case, whatever you like, and it just leaves it like that. JavaScript is really case sensitive, so if you mistype a function with lowercase, it will simply not work. It also requires parentheses more than NAV. In NAV, we can write a get statement or a find statement without parentheses, and in JavaScript, this is mandatory. We have a whole list of different operators. From an operator perspective, JavaScript is more like C family and Java, whereas AL is more like Pascal. And also it's not type safe. If you declare a variable, you don't declare the type. You only declare the type by putting something in it. And JavaScript allows you to add an integer to a string without blowing up. It allows you to compare an integer to a string, and it will just return true if it thinks it's like the same thing. And I have a bunch of examples that actually show how that works. If you look at it from a programming language family, it's a curly bracket language. You will see a lot of curly brackets like in C#. We don't have a begin and end around an if statement, but we have curly brackets. Curly brackets is something that you may want to get used to anyway, because in the same Visual Studio Code preview that Microsoft is shipping, you will see that in the future, curly brackets will be a normal thing in CAL as well, as part of indicating where functions start and end. And it's a scripting language, so it's not compiled. It's actually interpreted directly by the framework it's running on. JavaScript does not have any interface with the user interface. JavaScript is just a programming language at the background, and it inherits UI mechanisms from the framework it is running on. This is also something that I made a mistake on when I did some preparation. I found some JavaScript online, and the JavaScript that I found online uses the HTML UI front end, and ForNAV has a reporting front end. So we have our own syntax for making something bold and changing the language. So you must be careful, right? It's a language which is a little bit less forgiving than AL. So some examples: case sensitive and parentheses. We do allow you to read data from the database. So you can read records, you can browse through record sets, you can use flow fields, but the get statement is not in uppercase like you are used to with AL. The get statement has a capital G, and then the E and the T are lowercase, and you have to end it with the parentheses. If you have a field and the field does not have a space in the field name, normally in AL you can just say calc fields picture, and then it will. It doesn't need the quotes, double quotes. But in JavaScript, even though it's just one field name, you still need to put the quotes around it. Calc fields is with a capital C and a capital F. If you misspell that, it will just not work. So it's very important to spell the functions correctly. Otherwise, it won't work, and it won't give you the result that you're expecting. I'll have a list of AL functions that we have implemented in JavaScript. And if you think that you missed something in that list, don't hesitate to send us an email, and then we actually will evaluate if we think it makes sense. So the basic operators in JavaScript are the same as in CAL: plus, minus, multiplication, increment. We have that in AL as well. I'm not sure if we have the decrement like minus in AL, but I'm not using it that often, so maybe it actually works in AL. But if we look at the assignment operators, it is different, right? Equals is an assignment operator. It's not like in NAV. And to compare two variables, we actually have different operators. So here is where it is a little bit different than in AL. So comparison operators, this is where if equals is your assignment operator, you need to have a different comparison operator, and JavaScript has two types of comparison operators. JavaScript is not type safe, so that means that the integer value 1 is equal to the string value 1, and if you really want to test if the type is also the same, you have to actually have 3 equal signs, right? So if you see someone writing JavaScript and you see 3 equal signs, the guy is not drunk when he wrote the code. It's actually a normal thing in JavaScript to program like that. It's the same with not equal, with the exclamation mark in front of that. Logical type operations, also here JavaScript uses a lot of double characters like and or, and then we have the exclamation mark as logical not. This is where also it's different than NAV. And of course we also have objects. You can use objects in JavaScript. It's an object-oriented language. So you can have both types and instances, and I will show you actually how to use an object in JavaScript in ForNAV. So if you declare a variable and you don't assign anything to it, it's actually undefined. Undefined means that the variable was declared but not set. But if you don't define a variable in ForNAV and if you still use it, we just print blank. We don't print the text undefined. We print blank, so this may be a little bit strange. And also, if you have a variable which is null, that means someone actually has to explicitly set it to empty. The reason why I point this out is that a lot of AL developers are quite used to the fact that if you declare an integer without assigning it, or if you declare a decimal or a string without assigning it, it gets an empty value like 0 or an empty string. And JavaScript doesn't work like that. It's undefined. So it's not 0, but it's actually undefined. So when we use JavaScript in ForNAV, there's a couple of application areas where you can use it. I'll show you in a minute. And all of the JavaScript in ForNAV is connected into a big script, and whatever variable you declare in one part of the application is usable as well in the other part of the application, which is by design, which actually means that variables in ForNAV used with JavaScript are always global. And I stole this slide from Waldo. I know that global variables don't have a good reputation in NAV channel or actually in any programming language. But in this case, it's for a good reason, because in a reporting tool, you actually want to reuse information that you've set. You don't want to initiate it all the time after that. So let's look at where we can use JavaScript in ForNAV. There's a couple JavaScript starting in the on-pre report. That's the first part of the JavaScript which is executed. Here you can actually set your variables. Here you can declare classes and read data like setup tables from the database. Then for each data item, we have the on-pre data item and on the after get record script, which kind of is the same as the AL triggers that we used to have in the classic client. And then each control has an on-print trigger, which is primarily designed for changing the font properties dynamically. It's not really designed to do any calculations because it's actually executed after the real printing is done. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and I'll show you that in the example. So in the source expression, you can also use JavaScript. You can say, I have my company information and address, and I want to uppercase it. So you can just say dot uppercase. You can write small JavaScript expressions in the source expression. And then we have the show output, and the show output also allows you to return a Boolean expression indicating if this part of the report or this field should be printed or not, right? So a lot of theory. This is not what you are used to with me. So you're actually used to that. I'll take you to the application. So this is actually the point where we'll do that, and I'll show you a list of examples that I have prepared for you. So this report will actually be available for download after the webinar. So you can actually play around with it. If I design the report in Seaside, you will see that's a very silly report. It's not even using anything from the SQL Server database. It's just using the integer table, which is in memory of the service tier. And in my properties, I set the iteration to 1, basically just giving me a blank page handle to do crazy stuff in. I'm not using anything from the SQL Server database. I don't have any global variables except for the ForNAV variables. And I don't have any functions or text constants. I don't have any columns. Everything that we will see is going to happen inside of ForNAV. No AL code required for this webinar. It's also very useful if you have internal developers that are familiar with JavaScript, which is 100% of the young developers that come from university. They will all have knowledge of JavaScript, and AL is something that they have to learn. So this is my report. It's not nice. It's an ugly report, but it does the work that it needs to do. If we preview the report, you will see that we have all kinds of stuff on the report. We have small and brown, which actually relates to a dog. I will show you that in a second. And then we have something that you will probably recognize as an item number in the Cronus database, and the side panel, which is the description of an item. We have the name of the company, and we have the address of the company, which we read without writing any AL code. And then we have a whole bunch of mathematical string stuff that is there to show you what you can do with JavaScript. So let's start at the beginning, and let's start by explaining how to read data from the database without writing any AL code. And you start doing that by going into the report. And here we have a property in the report which is called records, which is a collection. And if I click on the collection, you will see that I actually have currently 3 variables, 3 record variables. The company information, which is a singleton table, only contains 1 record. The item table, which is a master data, contains multiple records with a lot of properties, and the location table, which is a subsidiary table. In order to read information from the database, I have to give the information to ForNAV, and I'm doing that in the on pre-data item of the integer table. This is just one of the places where I can do some programming. It's executed after the on pre-report, which we will look at in a minute. But here I actually have two statements. Company information.get, only using the parenthesis. I'll zoom in a little bit because it's very small. So we have company information.get and item.get 70,000. I'll zoom out again. You can also use things like calc fields, find, next, and set filter. The recommendation is not to make it too complicated. Actually, behind the scene, we are using recref and fieldref to do the math, which is kind of using reflection in CAL, which is not the fastest way of doing it, and we also don't have any control over indexes which SQL Server is using. But this is very useful if you just are interested in printing the company address, or if you have a sales invoice and the sales invoice line does not have a field in the item table that you need. And then normally you would fix that by going into C-side and adding a bunch of code and variables, which will make your data set ugly. And now it's just, you can grab any field from the item table without adding any variables or making your data set unnecessarily complicated, right? So now the item table just shows up here, and I can just drag fields into the report. So we get item number 70,000, and we get the company information. Let's make these two guys a little bit bigger. If I hover over this, you can actually see it's the company information. If I hover over this one, you can actually see it's the item. But let's make this one, let's make it red, and let's make this one blue. If I preview my report again, you will see that it's two different numbers, even though it's the same field, it's item number. So how do I switch from one item to the next item? Well, I actually implemented this to show you how the on print works. So in this field, which prints as 70,000, I'm doing an item.get with 70,001. But you can see that the field still prints 70,000, which means that only the next field will actually get the value that I read from the database. So the actual JavaScript is executed too late, and this may not be the place where you want to do any database operators. This is the place where you want to do formatting or string concatenations or whatever you want to do with the data you have, but you don't want to read data from the database. I have another example here. If I go back to my integer, I also have some code in the on after get record. And here I have a variable which is I, but I don't explicitly set the type of that variable. So I'm not instantiating it. In NAV, just if this is an integer, it would be 0. In NAV, if it would be a text, it would be an empty string. But in JavaScript, now it's an undefined variable, right? I also have another variable which I declare as 0. So n equals 0. So here I'm using those variables as I have I and n, and I'm actually trying to do something with I. I'm actually trying to increment I. I'm trying to manipulate the value of I, and I'm trying to do the same with n. I'm trying to print n, and I'm trying to add a number here. Let me zoom in. I'm trying to add a number to the onPrint trigger. So if we print the report again, you will see that the first value is nothing. Then it actually tries to add something. Then it says not a number, N-A-N, which is something that I learned earlier today. And then we have the value of n, which starts with 0, and then we increment it with n++, so the next value is 1, right? So the onPrint is not really why you want to change data. The onPrint is really why you would just want to manipulate the color or the or anything that you want to change in the layout. Another thing which is strange about JavaScript, and I'll have another example of that in a minute, but here we have two almost similar strings. We have 5 + 4 = comma 5 plus 4, and then we have 5 plus 4 equals plus 5.4. So what does this do? What is the difference here? If I preview this report, you will see that in the first part we just ignore the string at the beginning and we print 9, which is the result of 5 and 4. And in the second part, because we use a plus sign or a comma sign, we actually have 5 and 4 as a string, and because we start with a string, we also end with a string. So 5 is a string and 4 is a string. So in this case, 5 plus 4 is 54, which is an interesting way of doing math, right? So I think you start to get a hang of it. You think you can declare variables, you can change variables, and also JavaScript is not type safe, so you have to be careful what you actually do with your data. So I have a couple of more examples for you. Let's go back to the on pre-report. This is where you would typically declare global stuff and things that you use throughout your report. Let me actually delete this guy. No, let me actually keep it for now. I'll actually show you what happens if you don't do this. So the first thing I want to show you, and I'll zoom in again, the first thing I want to show you is a class. So in this case, we have a class called dogs, and the class has 2 members, Rover and Spot. Rover is a brown dog, Spot is a black dog, Spot is small, Rover is large, right? So this is like having a table in NAV with 2 records and 2 columns. You can start using this in your code. Here we have a field, and you can see that the source expression of this field, if I hover over it, it's dogs spot size, which should result in small. And if I hover over this one, it's Rover, and Rover, if you remember, is brown. The reason why I actually show this to you is let's preview the results. It's small and brown, and I think this may be a situation useful in situations where normally you would actually create a temporary table in CAL, and instead of working with a temporary table, you could create a class in JavaScript and use that in your report. So that's something you can do with classes. This is, I promise you, this is the most complicated scenario that I will show you in JavaScript. The next guy we have is we have a variable string to style, which is a random string. And if I just print the random string like I do here, I actually have the random string. But I can also put in my source expression, I can say to uppercase with parentheses. So not like this doesn't work. Not like this doesn't work, but like this, and then not like this, and then it actually works. And then if I look at this guy again, you can see that we actually print the uppercase value of the string. You can do more string manipulation. You can do things like substring. So here I have the substring of the company address. I want to have character number 1 to 10. And here I have another example where we have a string which we just hard code in JavaScript. Is it smart? Maybe not, but it does the trick. And in this case, I'm going to print banana, which is character number 7 to character number 13. So if we actually print this report, you can see that we do this string manipulation inside of NAV or inside of ForNAV. So a couple of last things that I wanted to show you is first of all how to work with arrays. This guy here is an array. We have a customer array with Tom, Bob, Sally, and Sue. And let's say I want to print the name of Bob. Here I have customer array 1. JavaScript is 0 based. So if I want to print Bob, Bob is not number 1, but Bob is number not number 2, but it's number 1. So if I print this, I get Bob. If I change this to 0, I actually get, I think if I remember correctly, it was Tom. Yep. I have another example where we have numbers, number 4, 3, 9, 1, 20, and 43. Let me remove this one and zoom in a little bit. Here we do a sort of the numbers. So we let JavaScript sort these numbers, and then we print the numbers as a string. ToString is a very popular method in any programming language except in AV. It's one of the core fundamentals of .NET. You can use anything as a string. So you can print an array as a string as well, which came as a little bit of a surprise to us, but it works. And if I preview this, I get 1, 20, 3, 4, 43, and 9, which is a sorting that you may be used to now with SQL Server. The old native database would actually put 20 after 4 and 43 after 9, but JavaScript sorts the same way as SQL Server does. So 20 is a lower number than 3. Last but not least, we have a test logical string. I declared this guy somewhere else. I think it was here. So we have a test logical string, and the test logical string is set to mark. We'll delete this line of code that I played around with. And now I say if 1 equals to 1, right? This is the equals sign for JavaScript. And if this is true, I want to replace mark with foo, right? So let's OK this, and let's actually, here we have the test logical string, and let's preview this report. And now we actually have, let me zoom out, this is not helping. Now we actually have foo, right? But now let's change the comparison, let's change the JavaScript, and let's change it to 1 equals the string of 1. So now we are comparing an integer to a string. If we now OK this, and if we preview, you will see that from a JavaScript perspective, this is still true. 1 integer is 1 string. If we change this now to say, change it to 3 equal signs, which is weird, but it works, we actually get mark, because now it's type strong. It's actually say, okay, an integer is not a string. So now it's saying that it's not true anymore, and it doesn't replace mark with foo. Last but not least, let's change it all the way back to 1 equals 1, but then we will actually do it like NAV. So we will say 1 equals 1. If we now preview the report, we actually see that we also get mark, because it's not a way to compare data, it's a way to assign data, and it doesn't work like that. Now I will actually break something. I will actually get a location which does not exist. So let's change this to location.get foo. So we get a location which does not exist. This will break all the JavaScript code which comes after it, right? So this does not work. This returns an error message, and it breaks all the existing other code. If I now preview my report, a lot of things now give an error message, and the integer sorting is gone. And if I go to my error report, you can see I have all kinds of ambiguous messages, which is errors that I get from my JavaScript. We're actually looking into this if we can actually print like location does not exist instead of this gibberish, but that's something that we will fix in one of the next releases. So these were just some examples that I wanted to show you. Here is a list of database operators that you can use with ForNAV. If anything is missing here, please send us a note. You can see set AutoCalc fields, everything is title case. Remember that when you start using it, if you use only one field, still use the single quotes around your fields, and JavaScript will be nice to you. So let's look at some common mistakes. In this list, there's also a couple of mistakes that I made when I started to do JavaScript. As a Navision dinosaur, I've programmed nothing but AL since I was 19, which is 21 years ago. The operators is very important. This statement will actually return false because x is not equal to 10. But this will actually return true because 10 is true. It's the binary value of 10 is true. And JavaScript will just return true and you will be confused. Another thing is that, like I showed you, an integer and a string can be compared, and then it actually will return true. And if you really want to say, okay, an integer is not a string and I wanted to test the type as well, you have to use the funny 3 equal signs, which doesn't mean that it's a drunk programmer, but it's really a thing in JavaScript to do that. If you add an integer to a string, it becomes a string. So that's really important to remember as well. This is just a subset of the things that I found. This is the hyperlink to the website. It's W3 Schools. It's a site about learning to do HTML and JavaScript programming. And this is a really good reference to start learning some of the basic JavaScript code. So congratulations. After listening to me for about 35 minutes, you're now a young JavaScript master and ready to go with JavaScript in ForNAV. Is it mandatory? No, it's not mandatory. You can still keep programming in AL. Should you do that? Sometimes, yes, you should. If you've been to one of my master classes, you have learned about a thing that we call Cyclomatic Complexity. Let's look that up. Cyclomatic Complexity. Cyclomatic Complexity calculates the complexity of your code depending on the number of if statements, and your JavaScript code should definitely not exceed the cyclomatic complexity of 3, 4, or 5. As soon as you start do that and you make a mistake, we don't have a debugger, and you should definitely move back to AL. So it's definitely not something that solves everything, but what we try to do with JavaScript is we try to keep simple stuff in ForNAV, and that you don't have to, if you just want to uppercase something, you don't have to go into AL and start adding columns to your data set, which will not improve the nice layout of your report. So with that, I would like to open it for Q&A. If you have any questions about this, if you have any feedback, also if you just like it or you did not like it, if you think it was a valuable half hour of your life, or I actually wasted half an hour of your life.
So, as always, please add your questions or comments in the chat function.
So Dave loved the Star Wars theme, thanks. I think I did as well. I thought it made a lot of sense here.
Any other beginner references?
Yes, let me switch. One that I found really useful is this website by Derek Banas. If you do a lot of YouTube learning, you will be familiar with Derek Banas. He's doing a lot of really good learning videos, and if you watch this 1-hour tutorial, you will know even more about JavaScript than you know now. You have to be a little bit careful because there are some JavaScript examples here which won't work in ForNAV. Like here, he has some code. I don't remember where it is exactly, but there is some code here that uses the UI elements of HTML, and ForNAV is not HTML, so some of the examples won't work. The good old wiki. Wiki is a good way of getting familiar with a programming language and learning the characteristics and how it was designed. And then we here have W3 schools, where I got the mistakes, and also a lot of things like the functions, the basic syntax. A lot of the slides that I have in the PowerPoint are actually copy and paste actions from this really good website.
ForNAV is here to help you with reports. We are ready to talk. Are you?